Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey Podcast. I'm joined today, and as always, by my good friend, my business partner, Mr. Jason Neil Patrick Harris Johnston Yellen in his house.
Guilty as charged.
You know, that's not the first time you've said guilty as charged. Are you just used to being charged of crimes?
I am not Joshua. I am a freeman.
You're a freeman.
How you doing?
I'm all right. How you been?
I'm all right. How you been? Don't start that again. Gosh, that Jungle Book scene is just one of my favorites. So good. The vultures, so good.
I don't know if...
With the Liverpudlian accents.
I don't remember the vultures. I remember the monkeys. I remember the bear that sings about bear things. What's the bear song? Has the bear song?
You might say bare necessities.
Oh, yeah. Bare necessities.
Yeah. Who's the one that sings about bare essentials? Who's that one? I think that's Billie Eilish.
Jason, we have so much to cover in this episode. You know, first and foremost, you were down in Texas, and you know, obviously, we're speaking with two lovely people from the Balcones Distillery today.
True.
Unfortunately, I could not be with you, but I was thankful you were down there to take up the helm, to grab the helm, to take the driver's wheel.
Jump into the breach.
So there's obviously that we will be getting to, but a few things happened. Last episode, maybe the episode before that, you had put forth a challenge to our listeners. And you said, listen, while we love hearing from regular listeners, wouldn't it be nice if someone who had been listening to us but had never written in, wrote in, and then we can highlight their emails. And so we've got a few of them, but I've selected two of them for today's episode. And I wonder if you might lead the charge. Seeing as you put forth the challenge, why not lead the charge in reading the first email?
I will once again jump into the breach. I thought it was a good challenge, especially at a time when questions email remains down, and we're still pitching the info@singlecastnation.com as the number one way to get in touch with us right now.
Yep.
So this email opens, "Hi, JJ and J. Medium time listener," which I love. "First time caller. I started listening to the podcast 4 years ago," which... Holy moly, to think 4 years of listening makes you a medium-time listener.
Right?
I would still go with 4 years being long-time listener. I would give kudos there.
Indeed.
I started listening to the podcast 4 years ago, and it quickly became my favourite whiskey podcast. And, let's be honest, my overall favourite. Thank you very much.
Whoop, whoop.
That's wonderful.
That is awesome.
I'm answering Jason's challenge from the latest episode, writing in to just say hello and thank you for creating this incredible community of whiskey nerds. Whenever I meet a fellow whiskey lover and we inevitably start swapping recommendations, bottles, bars, etc., I always insist they give your podcast a try.
Oh, gosh.
That is a very cool.
Right?
Thank you.
Amazing.
On a separate note, I especially loved your recent interview with Chris Riesbeck. I've been following Westland since joining the Judgment of Westland in New York City a few years ago, and I'm hoping to visit the distillery this summer on a trip to Seattle. I'm also eagerly awaiting your Westland Sauternes release. Thanks again, Rebecca. And I'm going to say, Rebecca, for being a long-time listener and first-time caller and responding to my challenge. Email us your address and I will personally send you a bottle of our upcoming Westland Sauternes cask.
Am I leaving that in?
Yeah, 100%.
Wow. Wow, look at that. And they always said the Scots were tight. But look at you. Look at you just shipping bottles left and right.
I'm going to hit up Chris Riesbeck for half the bottle cost.
Yeah, there you go. Wow. Well, the other email that I wanted to highlight in today's intro here is from a gentleman by the name of Garrett Jansen. And the subject simply reads, "Challenge accepted, writing in."
Awesome.
Hey, Jason and Joshua, first-time writer, relatively short-time listener, though I did unintentionally meet Joshua at Travel Bar during a tasting.
Ah, nice. Travel Bar. Still need to get there. Talk about it all the time.
I cannot believe you.
I'm only failing myself.
Yep. And America, I might add.
And America.
It says, I recognized his voice, which totally distracted me from the tasting, but I'd hardly call that a crime.
Were you hosting the tasting?
No. So this was no, our good friend Raj Sabharwal was there.
Nice one.
Tasting people out on Claxton's bottlings. And so
whoa, when was this?
This was in February, I want to say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Because then when did I see him? I saw him in April, and he was pouring Claxtons.
Yeah, there you go. Yep. Yeah.
Nice to have a little Claxtons connection.
Yeah, indeed. He continues, he says, speaking of crime, this is a great way to kill time while sitting and waiting during jury duty summons. Which brings me back to your original statement at the opening, where you said guilty as charged. I feel as if there's a connection here.
Yeah. Did he recognize my voice when I was on the stand? Jason shall go free this day.
He continues, I've been really enjoying the podcast. So a few questions to select from. Some you may have already answered in the past. 1. How do you decide to segment the retail releases from the online US-based releases? I've been really keen to try the Linkwood you just released, but it doesn't seem to have made it into my area just yet.
Okay. Which I assume his area is New York City if he was at a tasting at Travel Bar.
Yeah, I assume he is too. So why don't I answer that second part, and you can answer the first one there. The Linkwood, the Dalyuan, the Diamond, and the Kalila. I mean, here we are. It's June 12. My guess is bottles should start hitting shelves now if they haven't already, and that would be in New York and New Jersey. So, what I would do, Garrett, is maybe double check with Mike at Travel Bar. Travel Bar always supports Single Cask Nation. Our distributor will surely make an offer to them, so he may have a bit more of an inside scoop for you on that.
He might. Before I get on to that, answering the original question he had there, as you're talking New York and New Jersey, I know the same distributor services Connecticut.
Correct.
And I'm sure you hear it plenty because I hear it plenty. Number of Connecticut Nation members asking why we're not as prevalent in that state in retail as they would like to see. I'm curious.
Yep.
What's the reason for that, Joshua?
Yeah, you'd think, especially with my home state being Connecticut, that I
know why they're not in my home state.
I would love to have every single one of our bottlings in Connecticut. The problem is Connecticut law dictates every new label being registered within the state costs $200 for registration.
Holy moly.
And running a company whose business it is to come up with a new label for each and every new cask we bottle, it becomes, cost prohibitive to do it, especially when, maybe only 4 cases are being allocated to New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut to split amongst the 4 states, right? So typically what we like to do if we're doing a release and that release has, say, 6 bottlings in it, if we can, we try to target at least 2 of those to come into Connecticut, whichever 2 we have the majority of. And our good friends
Makes
at
sense.
Impex, as well as our friends at Skurnik, sort of help to sort of share those costs to bring the product in. Because, obviously they want the brand to grow in Connecticut too. It just ain't easy.
Yeah, is there an assumption there that somebody in Connecticut, how many borders do you share in the state of Connecticut?
3. We've got Rhode
Is it
Island,
3?
Massachusetts, and New York.
Okay, so the idea is that a Connecticutian would hop a border?
Oh, yeah. Easily. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, question we get.
I am one of those Connecticutians.
Well, you have to be, right? What's your alternative? Grab what comes into the state and then look elsewhere for what doesn't. Certainly, as the advice that goes to our nation members in Virginia is take a look in the DC area. We are well served there. If you make it as high as Maryland, we're well served there. Delaware, right? Go looking. So, okay, cool. Cheers. I thought it was worth covering there since we were fielding an adjacent question. The question of what goes to retail, what goes online. We've been answering that since 2017 when we first made the retail edition. And one of the ways we talk about it is e-commerce gives us room for special projects division. A release that maybe needs a longer backstory. You've heard us talk about the SCN Marvel-esque cinematic universe where we're reusing casks or, maybe doing a whiskey from a rye mash bill. What does that mean? And how do you tell that story? And how do you present that to a consumer? So places where we maybe need to tell a longer story can make it into the e-commerce side of things. And then there are some very special bottlings that have gone out into the real retail world. And I think currently the Linkwood and the Dalyuan fit that remit. I was, in a meeting with Steve Hawley the other day, and I just held up an example of our bottle, and as part of a conversation, and he said, and it was with the screen printing turned reverse, so he was only seeing the back of the bottle. He said, "Is that the Dalyuan? Look at the color on that, right? It's like Coke." Coca-Cola, I should emphasize, and not
so
mountains
dark,
of
light.
the white stuff. Exactly, very, very dark. And so that's a real special bottling that we believe can stand on its own 2 feet, can have a pretty concise story. The label can convey to a consumer what is happening in that bottle. And because we're prone to do this, I will say, keep your eye on US and global retail for a new fanciful name coming this year that is putting some very special casks out into the retail realm. And I will say no more at that juncture.
Yeah.
I rest my case, Your Honor.
He's got 4 questions here.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, but I don't think we're going to be doing all 4 because we do have an interview we need to get to.
What about, can we hold one until after the interview?
Oh yeah,
come back and have a further conversation.
I think that's a great idea. We'll include one more question, and it will come after the interview.
Perfect. With the interview mentioned, and with you saying earlier, Joshua, about being deep in the heart of Texas.
Like Grandma.
Hello, Dottie. It's me, Pee-wee.
Where are you calling from?
Texas.
Where?
Honest. Listen, I'll prove it.
The stars at night are big and bright. Deep in the heart of Texas.
The idea was for you and I to have the opportunity to go to Balcones for the first time. As it ended up, I went solo, and what a trip and what a welcoming group of people. We've been collaborating with Balcones since, 2017, would you say? I also pointed out to our friends down there that we had season 1 of this very podcast had Zach Pilgrim from Balcones on it.
Correct. That is correct. Yeah, I think the first bottling we did with them, which was a marriage of 2 casks, if memory serves, was 2017. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember those conversations starting early, and then obviously you move into the process and the back and forth and the bottling and blah blah blah. So yeah, we've been talking with them. Another name that got mentioned in our conversation was Alex, who we've known for a good while, welcomed me to the distillery.
Nice.
And we spent some time walking the grounds and seeing what was what, and very interesting. One of the things I learned that I did not know is their mash tun uses 2 waters. Not your 3, not your occasional Scottish 4, but 2.
That's similar to M&H out of Tel Aviv, but they need to do that for Shabbat observance purposes. I don't think anyone at Balcones are Shabbat observant when it comes to production, at least.
Not when they come to production, no.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, I thought there was a lot of interesting bits along the way, and we'll cover some of it in today's interview. So once Alex was done showing me around, I was handed off to Gabe and Emma, and we got to hang out in the blending room. There was a bit of conversation. Is it a blending lab? It is a blending room. You'll hear in this interview later on that it is a blending room. So I'm giving that to our listeners right now. But we covered broad strokes, and I left Gabe and Emma to get specific where they felt it was appropriate to get specific.
Yeah,
so
good.
in the grand scheme of things, we talked about the history of Balcones. We talked about their use of Golden Promise. We talked about malted barley writ large, and even the difference between imported barley and Texas grown barley. And I learned things there that I hadn't known previously. Then we get into the world of blending and into the world of maturation. So very nice broad strokes, and I allowed them to use their expertise to identify the moments where more detail was warranted. But I think it's a fascinating interview, and I think the listeners, and I think you, Joshua, will most certainly get something out of it. I'm sitting here in Waco, Texas, with Gabe and Emma of Balcones Distillery. Distillery or distilling?
Balcones Distilling, ING. It's a gerund.
I'm
Gabriel.
I'm Emma.
Well, thank you both for making time for me today. I had the pleasure of wandering the grounds with Alex and staying within the blue lines.
Of course.
I'm a very good boy, very good at doing what I'm told. We've had a couple of chats with Balcones on the podcast, as we call it around these parts. And one was a long time ago, season 1, with Zach Pilgrim, and then later with Winston Churchill Edwards. And so those were excellent conversations. But being at the distillery today is my first time out here, and has really brought home the production, the maturation, the things you get up to over here. But I wanted to start with the fact that you're producing multiple styles here. There's a bourbon, there's a rye, there's a single malt, there's rum. Can you speak to what that's like day in, day out, like a bit about your process there?
I think probably the best way to start is from the beginning, as usual. But when we started, we got into this to make single malts. That was the love of the founders and the folks who originally got everything moving. Was they were enamored not with bourbons, not with ryes, not even with rums. They fell in love with single malts from the UK. Scottish single malts, and
that'll save me correcting you.
To be clear, but they were drinking Ardbeg and Talisker and a handful of malts over there that really were wowing them, and they've been in beer for a long time in the craft brewing scene. And they got bit by the single malt bug. And so when we started, that was the original intention. But just as you would have it, because they were just slapping their savings together and doing a lot of stuff DIY and by hand, the mash tun that they bought was broken and it wasn't fully functional. So they wanted to start with single malt, but they couldn't. So they got their still first.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they got a still initially, and that's all they had. And so the first whiskey that we made, we cooked and fermented and did wash distillations and spirit distillations all in the first original vessel, a still from Portugal, a Hoga still from Portugal. And so that's why, so really talk about your kind of tools determining your medium a little bit, that's just what they had, so that's what they did. But they also knew from the beginning that they weren't interested in just doing bourbon, because they didn't put that into virgin oak. They put it into used oak because it kind of been done before. I think they had an early sense of maybe what really intense virgin oak impact might do in the Texas climate, and we're like, okay, well, let's see what it's going to do in a used cask. And they started with the corn whiskey. And that was intentionally off the beaten path of like, everyone else is doing this. We want to kind of explore this other avenue.
Gotcha.
And it was a little bit in keeping with the idea of single grains from the old world tradition of like, oh yeah, these expressive grainy whiskeys that are showcasing the grain substrate and not overpowering it with oak.
Is it fair? We've got Gabe first and then maybe Emma. Is it fair to talk through what you do in a day-to-day and how the bourbon, the rye, and all the others fit into that day for you, like an average day?
I would say I'll bounce that over to Emma, but I'll start by saying, because you have one day and then you just mentioned 4 different mash bills,
Exactly,
so we're obviously not doing
exactly.
them one. At 8 a.m. we do the rye whiskey, and then right around 11 we start doing the bourbon. It depends on our production cycle and what's going on. But yeah, I think from across the whole facility, I'll let Emma, you can kind of speak to, what running each of those looks like.
Yeah, as far as blending goes, we pretty much blend one core release at a time. We don't typically double up on what's on the counter unless there's an LTO out, a special release, or just a QC project. So we kind of get to focus all in on one of those things. Like we get to focus on single malt or on bourbon or on rye. And with our stills, we have 2 spirit stills. And so there are occasions where we're running the same mash bill on both still sets, but that's kind of where we see more of the overlap day to day, where we might have rye running on still set A and then corn or malt running on still set B.
Oh, interesting. Huh. And then you're just charting that fermentation through distillation and just the pipes connected to one go forth. Like just to my small brain, it sounds like you're not deep in the weeds, but there's an area of focus there that you got to be on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so we definitely see ourselves exploring 2 traditions. Like we speak in-house as, okay, this is a single malt, and then we have American style whiskeys, corn, rye, and bourbon.
Yeah.
And we've been laying down a lot more single malt than we have of the American style stuff, I'd say the last 2 years.
Okay.
To kind of like, swell the war chest a little bit and just, and increase our stock and really, put our eggs in that basket. But what I think is important to state is that we do double double pot batch distillation. So that's, we don't have a column. We wouldn't know what to do with one if you put it in front of us, except whack it with a hammer and probably break stuff. But we do pot distillation. So all of our, even though, we are running bourbon mash bills and we have run bourbon mash bills and put things into virgin oak, same with rye, whiskey. We're not doing a column. Everything kind of meets in the crucible of the double pot distillation. That being said, our malts are run through a mash lauter tun. So we're separating. Obviously, we're leaving grain behind and taking the sugary liquid and fermenting it off grain and distilling off grain. Whereas with our bourbon and rye and corn, we're using a cereal cooker. So we're using hammer mill, not a roller mill, and we're processing the grain, and then we're fermenting on grain and distilling on grain. So our wash stills are set up very uniquely with what's called an external reboiler, or maybe an external calendula in the cognac region, where it's a separate shell and tube vessel that the spirit is pumped into, and it's heated there so that if you scorch any of the organic matter, the on-grain substrate, you do it in the reboiler, not in the body of the still.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So we can do both. So we're doing both on-grain and off-grain, but everything is pot distilled. But we do have a cereal cooker for American styles and a mash lauter tun for the single malts.
In coming through the facility with Alex earlier and talking our ways, we got to the mash tun. We talked about 100% malted barley going into that mash tun. And he talked about two waters going through that, a first water and then a sparge water. Growing up in Scotland, learning the business in Scotland, you see a lot of three waters, and then sometimes the outlier in Scotland is the fourth water. Mm-hmm. And so what do you find the value in the two water system is? And is that all the way back to 2008? I joined, which is probably important to say, I joined in 2016. So when I'm talking about stuff before my time, it's the royal we. Gotcha.
It's not me there. Emma joined in
2021.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Emma joined in 2021.
Okay, so recent history.
Yeah, so recent history. So kind of like the not the old guard, not quite the old guard, the newer guard.
And then when was the building move?
So we bought this building in 2013, 2014, and we moved production into this facility in February of 2016.
Okay.
And then I joined December of 2016.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've only ever known just this facility. So I can't fully speak to how they were doing things back then. I don't think they were sparging. I think they were doing batch. They were doing adding large additions, batches of water, and not doing like our sparge is a continuous sparge. So yeah, we have a sparge ring in our mash tun, and we're doing one long continuous sparge.
Interesting.
Yeah, after our initial mash in. But speaking to the different levels of water, I'm familiar with some of the Scottish practices, and I think largely it's maybe related to efficiency. You can retain, some of your last runnings and use that next, and hey, you get a little bit more fermentables, that
exactly.
way. So I guess our facility isn't quite as chic, and not quite as efficient in that regard. We have had to do it a few times where we maybe mashed in at too low of a temperature, so we had to draw some off and heat it up and then throw it back in. That we did that once or twice, clogged a couple of plated heat exchangers and pissed off our maintenance manager. But yeah, the second water when I first moved in here, we were just batch sparging. So we were just adding in water through the cereal smasher, and then we had the continuous sparge ring put in, and now. That's honestly been great because it's improved our efficiency. It's like leveled the grain bed evenly, and I think allows for just like a more controlled process a little bit. Not necessarily for consistency, just for there's no reason to kind of bastardize your substrate and your raw ingredients with like a misshapen mash bed, or you get a ton from one side of the mash tun, and then you leave a bunch of fermentable sugars on the other side of the mash tun. No reason to do that. So,
and then are you raking that periodically, or is that
man, I love the depth. It's good. It's good. It's great. It's lovely. So yeah, we were actually had a practice where we were raking pretty frequently Golden Promise, and Golden Promise is a very steely, sturdy malted barley, right?
Perfect.
So it has a lot of tenacity and it can really withstand a lot. It's made. We get it from Simpson's. Pre this facility, we would get a lot of it from Fawcett. They do a lot of floor malted Golden Promise malted barley in the UK. Both Simpsons and Simpsons owns Golden Promise. But Fawcett is, for some reason, is allowed. They may license it. They're allowed to use it. So those are the cheap malt houses that you can get Golden Promise from. But yeah, very steely, sturdy barley. And so we would do a really long rake on that. As we're matching in, we're continuously moving the rakes on the Golden Promise. The Texas malted barley we found is a lot more friable. So it's a lot more floury, a lot more friable. It's a little more highly modified, a little more mealy of a barley, right? And so because of that, we had a lot of problems basically creating a paste over the false bottom and sealing in the false bottom and getting horrible runoff.
Understood.
And so it's actually recently our quality technician, Johnson Haygood, he explored just doing right at the end of your mash in, doing like a quick turn of the rakes, maybe like a full 360-degree turn, just at the end to settle the bed. And that has actually worked wonders for running Texas malted barley. Because now we have we have open bed. We've settled the bed, so we have great, flow through the bed, but we haven't really smashed in any of the flour or kind of shredded any of the barley on the bottom of the false bottom. So yeah, but that was a lovely lesson for us, in just, the expectations that you have between two different regions that are producing barley and growing barley and different maltsters, and going, oh yeah, you can't apply the same process to every raw ingredient,
Have you experimented with other malted barleys?
What exactly do you mean?
So other strains, other varieties. So we've got the Golden Promise, we've got the Texas barley. Mm-hmm. Are there any others that you've played around with? The reason I'm asking, what I'm kind of chasing here, is this idea of a robust Golden Promise grain and then a more delicate Texas grain.
Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't had experience with other grains, and so I'm curious if you had that opportunity.
And I'm sorry, Emma, for taking all the barley history. I've been around the block a little bit. I'll take it. But yeah, so when we started, and this is a key maybe thing to help understand our interest in single malt and kind of why one of our flagship single malts, Texas One Single Malt, is made with Golden Promise. When we started producing single malts all the way back in 2010, I think when we released our first single malt, there was no brewing and distilling happening on Texas malted barley. There was no brewing grade or distilling grade Texas malted barley being grown in the state of Texas.
Gotcha.
It's all feed barley. It's all 6-row. It's feed barley. And it's been that way for a really long time, because we released the first whiskey in Texas, possibly ever, definitely since Prohibition, but likely ever in Baby Blue. So there's no scene, there's no community or scene here when we got started, right? Mm-hmm. So we reached for Golden Promise because that was one of the ingredients of a lot of the single malts that we were drinking that we were really enjoying. So this kind of throwback heritage, delicious, scrumptious grain, barley. And so that's what we reached for. And then in 2014-2016 window, a maltster was deciding to open up in the state of Texas by the name of Blacklands, and they were working with Texas A&M to bring in varieties from around the country and around the world and just field test them at Texas A&M to see, hey, which one of these barleys being grown in other regions around the country could work in Texas. The initial variety they settled on was called Conlon.
Never heard that.
Yeah, and since then, that was 6 years ago, and then about maybe really quickly we moved to Genie, which is a more modern variety.
Familiar.
Low GN, very delicious. And the last 2 years we've been on Odyssey, which is a 0 GN. And so that's what we've been using predominantly. So if we're talking about variety, there's that. Now, Blackland's closed. So after a couple years, Blackland's closed. And now the maltsters we're working with are Tex Malt in Fort Worth and Maverick in Amarillo, where Maverick is a little smaller scale and Tex Malt is the biggest player in Texas malted barley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they both make excellent malts, and we really enjoy working with both of them. Our mash bills tend to be, from them, 100% of their pale, though we've tried 100% Pilsner malt, but tend to be 100% of their pale malt. So they're not their distiller's malt, but their brewer's pale malt.
Okay, understood.
I'm sorry. I'm not known for my brevity. I'm going to give the microphone to Emma, and I'll leave the room. I'm done, okay?
You'll be missed, Gabe. Please don't leave us.
Don't go.
So again, on my tour with Alex, I saw something absolutely remarkable that I don't get to see really ever, which is you've got a spirit still, and please correct me if I'm attributing it to the wrong still, but a spirit still that's got 4 turns of a coil above it. I think the line arm was discussed there. Mm-hmm. So a cyclical, would you say that? Cyclical line arm with 4 turns on one of the spirit stills, but then 10 turns on the other spirit still. What are you, my mind is still blown. I'm just imagining it, seeing it again in my mind's eye. But what are you finding there? What's the purpose of having that in place?
Yeah, so I'll be similar to Gabe with using the Royal We. I joined December of 2021, so this is coming from all the stories and tours that I've taken. But when we moved into this facility, we were greatly increasing our size and our production capabilities. And so Forsyth actually custom made those stills for us. And correct me if I am wrong, Gabe, but the old building, the line arm traveled quite a distance, like across the building to get to the condensers. And so they kind of wanted to replicate this ratio of distance plus keeping our intense climate in mind and also maximizing this space. And we end up with these coiled line arms that allow the vapors to travel in the copper line arm longer, similar to how they did before. And so it also just helps us in general with this climate. We get more reflux. We get a little bit more of that like bright, snappy spirit on the still with the higher count of coils. It gets slightly more reflux on that still. So there have been times where we've geared certain spirit types to be distilled on certain spirit stills because we're going for a particular character. So on the one with more coils, we'll get that bright, snappier kind of characteristic, and then we get a little more body and oily character on the one with fewer coils.
Ah, okay. Would that ever divide by grain type that was being distilled?
Yeah, it definitely did. So, and we have preferences, and there are times where we distill the same thing on both of them, but we tend to prefer when we were doing bourbon, we preferred making it on the still with more coils, same with rye. Okay. And then the corn and the malt were typically geared more towards spirit still B with less coils. But as we keep increasing our single malt production, where there are many moments when we distill both stills with malt, and I'm personally finding that there's a really nice balance to that. You get more to play with and work with, and I'm starting to fall in love more and more with our GP on A. I think comes across really nicely and fruity. And so it's just a different kind of character that we're able to get. When I think of it as a blender, I just see that's another tool that we'll have in the future to work with for texture and body and all of that.
Very nice. And so I love the way you just very comfortably slipped in GP on GP on A, right? Yeah. And because I've been down seeing it, right? So it's the Golden Promise. Yeah. And then A is the 4-turn
it's the
line arm.
More coils.
A is the 10 turn. Okay. Wow. Getting it in my head is so remarkable, and all that reflux that you're getting. So I think you've just perfectly opened the door for the next topic, which is blending. So just imagine I'm the family dog and I know nothing here. Just again, talk me through. What are you receiving? How are you? And you did that one earlier as well with your QC, right? Your quality control.
Yes.
And so talk me through that process. As you receive a sample, where does that go? What do you do with that?
Yeah, so when we are looking to start working on a blend, we will request samples of any barrel that could be a candidate for it. So depending on mash bill, barrel type, age, sometimes we'll add in barrel notes just to keep track of whether something's slated for an LTO or we want to wait on it a little longer. We take all these things into account and get this tranche of samples in. And each vial represents one barrel, and we just organize them out on the counter. If we have different mash bills pulled, we'll separate them by mash bill first, then typically by barrel profile. So we like to keep like groups and chunks of similar barrel profiles together. And then within that, we'll start sorting them by age. And we keep things organized in a way where, like with malt, we sample every single individual cask. We do analysis on every cask. Whenever we're working on Texas 1 single malt, it's occasionally we'll be able to kind of lot together a group of casks that were from the same distillation day. If they went into the same barrel type, then we will lot them together in like a mock-up kind of group. But because we use so many used casks, you get a lot more variety between the maturate and what the flavor profile is going to be like. And so we'll take notes on the nose with the aromas, kind of like the intensity of it or the experience of it. We'll take notes on flavors, texture, finish. Again, kind of just the experience, like what is this, how does this feel, like what is this overall impression. And we'll also make note if we notice any flaws or anything that, like maybe one cask isn't as far along as we thought it would be for its age and barrel profile, or if it has a little spicy, prickly texture. We make notes of those things as well. And then when we're done with all of our like grading and blending, we'll create work orders to help those casks and like mitigate those kind of, I hate saying flaws, but those, those, deviations. And when we're blending, we do, we take all of the highest quality scores. So each barrel gets a quality score, and we take the top 2 scores generally and start kind of building a base from there. We'll do we pretend every barrel has the same amount of volume in it. So we'll do like an equal proportion from each barrel and start building groupings of barrel profiles, and then we'll start combining those together and just slowly build up to a base. And that base needs to build up to the flavor profile for the blend, but also to the volume that we're needing and wanting to create. And then when we get happy with where it's at, we'll send that list off of barrels to dump. And then we get a sample back of the actual base we're working with. And then we get a better idea of average volume per cask that we got, and start working on adding minor additions to the blend until it's across the finish line and we approve it.
That's fascinating. Like, what a process to be going through. What kind of time frame are we talking from the first moment a sample comes across your desk to that blend being complete and heading out to market?
I feel like it could take 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That seems like it might be a reasonably quicker turnaround than I was imagining in my head. And then are there any differences procedurally or just, not really in terms of your expectations, but in working with them? How different is single malt from bourbon, from rye? Do you have to kind of recalibrate your own brain as you move between those grains?
There are moments where I feel like it comes easier for me. Like sometimes switching between mash bills is helpful because it gets me out of the weeds. Like if I'm working on malt for an extended period of time and I just stay in one space for too long, it almost feels like I stop noticing the subtleties, or I start noticing my notes are becoming more and more similar. And I'm like, okay, I need a break from this. And a lot of the time my break will look like, drinking some water, checking a few emails, just taking a break from doing sensory, literally. But other times, if we have other mash bills out on the counter, it can help to jump into a different world and just almost like shock the palate.
Yeah, that's well said.
And just try doing sensory on some corn whiskey or rye, and it's just a completely different flavor profile. It puts my brain in a different space and kind of forces me to focus again.
Do you ever have a moment when you move, and we don't need to name names of grains. We don't need to make them feel bad about themselves. But do you ever go from one grain to another grain and you think, oh, I kind of forgot what you were able to bring to the table, grain over here. Did you ever get a moment like that? I'm always giving corn a harder time than malted barley, you know?
I think I definitely do. I see it happen with certain barrel profiles where maybe I underestimate them. And then I visit and they surprise me. Or feel like I've learned a lot with my time at Balcones and just our different profiles and all that they can do for us. And I've been shocked multiple times by Gabe pointing, me bringing a blend sample to him and him giving feedback and just like, yeah, this one thing is missing. And where he sends me to find it is shocking. And I wouldn't have instinctively gone there necessarily.
I love that.
That's been a fun kind of pattern to learn in our warehouse.
Awesome. But your blending experience, Gabe?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as the different whiskey types that we produce, I think what's kind of fun is we're doing something. We really do perceive that we're doing something a little bit different between the American style whiskeys and the single malts. I mean, it's kind of ironic. It's like you can kind of say, oh, like to your point, corn. Corn's a little ho-hum. I mean, you put it in tortillas for God's sake, But to corn's credit, you're not making tortillas out of malted barley, So there's a lot to corn just standing on its own. And I think there's so much within the substrate of our rye and corn whiskeys that we're trying to honor, right? I really do feel like our single malt is exemplified by this really complex melange of fruit and grain and honey and sun-kissed barrels. And there's a whole lot that goes into it. It's very complex. But in a way, to me, it kind of needs all that. It needs that fruit component to kind of help make the barley component make sense, the substrate component make sense. So we're pushing that fruity character through esterification for the style of our fermentation, right? Whereas on rye and corn, and I'll go one step further. On the malts, we're dual pitching yeast. We're adding a malt whiskey strain and a ale yeast strain. And we're encouraging this complexity and a little more heavy alcohol character so that we have the cocktails to create esters and create fruit character, right? Whereas with the American whiskeys, we're pitching just the one malt whiskey yeast strain, which is a little bit more of a workhorse, producing a lot of alcohol, but also like a little less complexity because we're trying to expose the substrate. We're trying to, when you taste Baby Blue, we want you to taste corn, not tropical fruit, or peaches. But there's flutters of those in there, but we hope that you go, oh my God, it tastes like a tamale. Yeah, that's the idea. Like we worked really hard, and Texas farmers worked really hard growing this beautiful, blue corn in Texas. Then we roasted it to give it a little additional oomph, a little additional butteriness, right? And that's what we want you to taste, not something else, not pineapple from an ester, and same with the rye too. We love our rye. It's not a spicy rye. It's not a classic rye. It's not a dill forward rye. It's very fruity and citrusy and bergamonty and coriander, like freshly ground coriander. It's beautiful. And we're not trying to smother that in esters. So it's a little bit of a stylistic choice, I think. I think it ends up making the corn and rye a little easier to blend because there's not quite as much going on. It's a little more singular. Whereas the malts end up being incredibly complex. Not only are we looking for grain character and body and acid, we're also looking for tropical orchard and stone fruit. And so it just ends up being, and then oak contribution too, and then virgin oak character and all the elements, and so those end up being the most fun blends, but also very taxing. Whereas I honestly feel like we could do a Baby Blue blend in our sleep a little bit because it's just like, it's a little easier to do.
So previously Emma opened the door perfectly for the next question. Now you've just opened the door perfectly for the next question, which is, traditionally we've talked about Balcones and really Texas single malt, this baking Texan sun and like the new charred oak. And I feel like there was an easy story to tell there. And I think, being guilty as a consumer, it became very easy to pigeonhole Balcones as a Texas single malt with this intense heat and new charred oak. Is there a more subtle story to be told there, for us as consumers to be heard there? as you've worked your way through the maturation program, the different casks that Emma's alluding to, the different qualities that these different casks are bringing to blending purposes, have we fallen into a lazy trope in describing Texan maturation?
I love this question. It's great because there's so many ways we could address it. But yeah, I won't disparage us, and I won't disparage anyone else. I think the really rewarding thing about what Emma and I and the rest of the staff gets to be a part of is that we're at the beginning of hopefully a 100, 200 year, 1,000 year whiskey tradition. And so when we started, we were working with what we knew, which was nothing. So, and everyone was poor and everyone had small production capacity. So yeah, putting something into a 30 gallon barrel or whatever you could afford, and then realizing, oh wow, like that barrel rapidly evaporates in this climate. And actually it's like a wine reduction on the stove. It actually makes something really interesting that you can't do in Minnesota or Ohio or Oregon or whatever. Yeah. And so, yeah, it is a unique character. Absolutely. And so I don't want to disparage anyone for doing that at the beginning, because it was what we knew, and we were pioneering, we were cutting our teeth, that being said, I think, we've, us and other Texas producers, got known for some really bombastic, tannic, bold, powerful whiskeys, and we still release those, and we still enjoy those, definitely. But I think the next phase we're in, it's a little bit in maturity. You kind of start out a little bit more, not cognitively impaired, but you're a little bit more brash, and you're trying to find your style, and you're trying to find your way, and you're in your red phase where everything's love and emotion and power. And then you reach this next level, and you learn some lessons, and you skin your knee, and your heart's broken a little bit, and you go, oh, like, I wonder what subtlety and elegance, and I wonder what just a different relationship to where we are could reveal. And so that's kind of, I feel like the next era for us is going like, what, that is one way to use the Texas climate, but it's we don't want to pigeonhole it into a certain barrel size and a certain type of character when we're just starting. There's so much more to explore. And so in-house, I'll move into actual production stuff instead of philosophy or whatever.
I was loving it. You're waxing so great. Poetic.
Yeah. Emma's rolling her eyes. She's like, this is like this is the second time I've heard this today. But no, so in our maturation program, what we've done to kind of move ourselves more into the exploration of like subtlety and elegance and grace within the Texas climate is one, we don't want to. It's disingenuous to perceive the Texas climate and where we are as this like this malicious character that we have to make sacrifices to, and does these really unpredictable, cruel things to our whiskey, which I think is some of what the early days was like, oh man, like, that's a little bit like this boasting, like, oh, making it in Texas is so hard. But we're trying to partner with it and go, okay, so let's do lower entry proof. We get a lot of evaporative loss here, but not if we drop the proof and barrel, because there's less of a difference to equilibrate. So lower entry proof in this climate is what we've explored. And over the years, we've probably dropped our average lower entry proof by at least 10 points. So from probably closer to 124, where everything was going in at almost max legal proof in the US for whiskey, down to closer to 114, 115.
Okay.
And a part of that, was recognizing that the Texas climate was, sending our spirit deep into the barrel and extracting a lot from the cask, a lot of tannin, a lot of lactones in a very short amount of time. So by reducing the proof, you encourage it to pick up hemicellulose. You kind of soften some of the spice character that you're grabbing. You get a little more body and sugar, right? And you also just slow the time. It's like you'll still get to those high proofs and you'll still get spice, but you won't do it at year 2. You'll do it at year 4, 5, and 6, right? And then the other big thing that we've been working on the past 3.5 years now is larger format casks. So working with 500 liter casks and up, larger format casks, both new virgin American oak 500 liter casks, and also domestic wine puncheons, as well as a handful of foreign some French 700-liter casks, and some sherry puncheons, a handful of sherry puncheons too, and just kind of seeing, okay, in these larger casks, we knew that in a 5-gallon barrel we're losing 25% a year, right? And then in a standard size barrel we lose 10 to 8% a year, right? And now, so if you go from 20 liters to 200, and you can reduce your evaporative loss by half, what happens if you go from 200 to 500? And what we found is a massive reduction in evaporative loss, from about 8% per year to closer to 4.5% per year.
Oh, wow.
In larger casks. So yeah, this is, again, it's all just doing the work of going, okay, the end of the story of the Texas climate isn't that if you put it in a tiny barrel, you'll make a powerful whiskey in 6 months. It's like, okay, well, where can we encourage ourselves to be more nuanced and listen to what Texas wants to do, and just change our tools, and go, okay, we're gonna listen to you, and we're gonna say, oh, you want a bigger barrel, and you'll and not even like you need a bigger barrel, but if we do that, you'll show us elegance and grace on a 10 to 12 year timeline instead of on a 2 to 4 year timeline. Yeah. I'm done.
Is there anything you would like to add to what he just said?
I feel like that's perfect. That's one of my favorite parts about being at Balcones is how intentional everything is, every decision is, and we really are at the very beginning of Texas history in the whiskey industry. We're babies compared to the rest of the world's whiskey industry.
Sure.
And to be a part of doing this exploration, and Gabe touched on seeing what Texas whiskey could look like in a more delicate, nuanced profile 10 to 12 years from now. I think people kind of throw out age statements as a very important feature on a label, and it's really not for the sake of letting a whiskey get older to be able to say it's older, but there's so much we don't know what's happening. We don't know what's possible if whiskey sits in a barrel in Texas for 12, 15 years, because it hasn't really, I haven't tasted it. I haven't seen that yet. And so to explore what our new make is capable of transitioning into when it has the chance to rest for that long, and what that would look like. I just think it's a very exciting place to be, and I hope that it's hard, and a lot of people are putting a lot of effort and hard work into it, and I hope that we keep doing it for hundreds of years.
No, so this is remarkable how wonderful a job each of you is doing opening the door to the next question. Because last year you had 15th anniversary. Congratulations on that front. I know you're both working diligently in the blending space here. And so as you're guiding the next wave of Balcones, I know we're talking about larger casks. I know we're talking about using the environment perhaps in a different way. From a flavor profile, from a flavor standpoint, from a grain standpoint, what are you looking to work on, to implement, to add to that Balcones history over these next bunch of years? We'll keep that term nebulous.
Nebulous. It's a great question. I mean, So a big piece for us is the maturation side. And it's a holistic approach, because it's easy to parse things out and say, well, what are you going to do with the barrels? It's like, well, we also recognize that if we put something in a barrel for 12 years, we have to distill it differently, because we need a different cocktail of compounds at the beginning to make sure that we have solvents and we have the character that we might want at the end, which means that it's not going to taste the way that we're used to it tasting, as new make or as 1, 2, and 3 year old. That front of just peering through time at what our Texas single malt distillate could do in barrel is a big piece of what we're looking forward to. And then we've increased a lot the amount of Texas malted barley that we're laying down. So we're trying to dig more deeply into the state and build relationships across the state, and work with our maltsters, work with grain brokers, work with farmers to help understand what's possible here, different regions. Most of the barleys come from the high plains. We'd love to get some out of the hill country. We'd love to get some even closer. The high plains is 8-9 hours away. Oh my God. So what if we could get barley, within an hour or 2 hours from here? It would be really interesting to see. So that's one thrust. And I think one of the big things too for us is, you mentioned the heat of the climate, which, affects maturation, but also we do long, and we didn't touch on this yet, we do long open fermentation. So we do long acidic 7-day fermentations on our malt. We encourage microflora. We encourage the Texas environment and critters to kind of take hold and help inoculate and contribute to what we're doing. And so that means that we get slightly different character throughout the year, depending on what we're running, right? Depending on what's in the air, right? And so in the winter, maybe when the air is a little deader and there's not as much activity in the air, we'll produce a different malt than in the summer, where there's a lot of dust blowing around and there's a lot of warmth and there's a lot of LABs and other bacteria and critters in the air. And so, eventually we'd love to get to a point where we could quiet ourselves enough and still ourselves enough to actually be able to listen and hear that and pick up on those subtleties and be able to tell that story for our location, our home in Waco. So that's going to be, I think, exciting for us. We're very, there's a lot happening on the barley front and other parts of the country, and a lot of people are experimenting and doing a lot of different things. I think for us, we see, the barley side has been important, but we've restricted our medium a little bit, because we don't do these big multi-barley mash bills, multi-malt mash bills, where we don't have 5 different types of barley. We just do the one. And we've pretty much done that across the whole portfolio, except for our bourbon mash bills for the most part. It's 100% roasted blue corn. It's 100% pale malt. It's 100% Golden Promise. It's not 85% Golden Promise and 1% chocolate and 10% Vienna or whatever. And we've restricted ourselves to just kind of okay, we're using this size brush for this, instead of the teeny little brushes and doing all these little things. Is we've kind of narrowed our focus so that it's more like vintage. It's more the climate and the maltster and the substrate having its voice, and not all these options in the kiln. It's more okay, no, this is what you're getting. Yeah. You're tasting the place, not a decision necessarily that a human made.
So I can't not ask you what I'm about to ask you, which is, so many distillers, and certainly in Scotland, we hear the C word of consistency. And here you are sitting here talking about seasonal variants, but those samples, as we've discussed with you and Emma, those samples are going to come to your desk and you're going to make a blend out of that. But now you're talking about vintage. Is there a way forward that does become vintage for Balcones, or will it be spoken about more kind of off the record? If you're at a tasting and you've got someone's attention for a longer period of time, what does that story look like going forward for you, and are you grappling with consistency?
I think there will be expressions in the future that emphasize vintage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Intentionally, yeah. And in regards to consistency, that Emma and Alex, who are in the room, have heard me say this before, and so feel free to roll your eyes. But we don't fetishize certainty. So we're not interested in consistency. We're not interested in making a whiskey that tastes the same all the time, because it's really an impossibility. And well, one, we're not interested in it, but and two, in Texas it's hard, and that's part of the cadence that we're learning with our climate, is that's not necessarily what Texas wants to give us. It's going to change. And, to some extent, obviously, Emma is a diligent blender, and we're blending together, and we're fine-tuning, for example, lineage. We're going, let's get as much tropical fruit as should be in lineage. But often we can't do it. Sometimes we can't, and that's because of the critters. That's because of the microflora and the Texas contribution and that fermentation character that is out of our control, and that's intentional. And so all of our bottles are batched, so you can look on the back and go, oh, that's lineage 21-1 or 22-1. The first lineage blend that Emma jumped in on when she first started, she blended it a little differently than I would. Yeah. We did it together, but it got down to the final decision, and she's like, I really like this one. I was like, well, I would do this one, but let's go with that one, And it's it's a little more fruity, it's a little brighter, it's a little more effervescent. It's great, and that's just all part of it, that each distiller is going to do things a little differently. One, Josh had salsa verde tacos that morning, and so his head cut is a little less conservative than maybe it would be because his palate is a little maybe fatigued in a way that it wasn't the day before, and so it's going to be different. That's all part of it. That's the human component to this. Yeah. That is our contribution to what Texas is contributing. So it's this mix of both of those things, and we don't have no intention of acting like we're producing something that's the same all the time.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a celebration of people, a celebration of environment, a celebration of location. Like that sounds wonderful, and a wonderful thing to communicate to a consumer.
Yeah, it can be tricky to take because and Jared has espoused this before, and it's totally valid. Is that within a brand, you do need this idea of what the brand is, and people want familiarity. That's kind of why they keep coming back. They go, "Oh, that's safe. Oh, I love that expression. That's the expression that I drank with my dad before he died." And it's like, well, we don't want to go so far away from this thing that we released into the world that now is a part of other people's lives that they can't recognize it anymore. Yeah. But we're also not trying to do it in such a way where it's the same for 10 years. And, you get a bottle of that, like it's a cheeseburger at McDonald's where it's like, I know it's going to have the exact number of onions and the exact grams of ketchup every time. It's like, we're not interested in that. But to honor what we've done before, but to allow it to have its own life.
Sincere thanks to Gabe and Emma for their time there. I think maybe in the background you heard a little bit of Alex there when he came and joined us in the blending room. We will circle back as we get out of this episode to hear a little bit more from Gabe and Emma. But more on that in just a second. The day after being at Balcones, I had the pleasure of hosting a Drammers tasting in Austin. And that meant I had the absolute distinct pleasure of getting to hang out with the Feldners, David and Erin Feldner. It was
very nice.
So wonderful, so wonderful. I also have to say, I'm going to come back to the Feldners in just a second, but I also have to say, there were some avid Single Cask Nation fans in the room that night. People showed up to a Single Cask Nation tasting with bags of Single Cask Nation bottles. Even to the point of saying, I was waiting until you or Joshua or both were in town so I could open this. And then opened up, Wild Turkey 12-year-old.
Wow.
Unbelievable. And I'm saying, no, please don't feel like you have to open it. Please don't. And then, no, this is why. And then, cigar boxes were brought out. I signed, a cigar box.
Wow.
Just wild, wild, wild. But the reason I bring this up is that the Feldners brought along Balcones for us. Mm-hmm. And so we have Balcones Rye, aged in New European Oak for 61 months. The reason I mention this, bottled at 68.7% alcohol.
I'm going to gird my loins with that one, man.
And then they also brought along Texas Single Malt whiskey, aged in a new American oak barrel and finished in a used American oak cask that previously held Balcones peat for a total of 67 months. And then that comes in at 60.3%. So we've got those two bottles to enjoy the next time we see each other.
There we go. I'm looking forward to that.
Sincere thanks to the Feldners for such kind gifts. They also brought along some samples for us to share. There was a sample in there for Jess as well. Just such absolute sweetheart people. Avid listeners of the podcast, avid supporters of the brand, even to the point David Feldner, when in specs, will recommend Single Cask Nation bottlings to people.
Wow.
Just as a consumer roaming the store shelves.
We are lucky, Jason. We are really lucky to have people like the Feldners supporting us. That's
right.
Great. Yep.
Right. So from Rebecca's early email and Garrett and the Feldners and being welcome to Balcones, just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you sincerely, everybody. It really means the world to us, and we do not take it lightly.
At all. Yep. Yeah, cheers. Cheers to that. There really isn't any huge news to be sharing at this time. I mean, that being said, there are still a few bottles remaining from our celebration of American spirits, which launched on June 6th. So if you've held off, or because you wanted to allow others to grab a bottle or whatever, please don't wait. They're still there. And on top of that, we still have some Scotch whiskey up on the site, and we still have some rum up on the site. So it's
perfect
all there
for
you.
summer.
Yep. And our $300 free shipping rate still stands. So if you want to unlock free shipping, make an order that's at least $300, and boom, we'll ship it to your doorstep for free, which is quite nice.
Yeah, that's been well received as well.
Yeah, it has been. It has been. And people have said some nice things about the bundles as well that we've done. The Arden American and Ardmore bundle, along with the Foursquare and Thornton Rum bundle that we did. So, who knows? Maybe down the road we'll do some more. Those are always meant to be limited time deals. So if and when you see them, it's a good way to jump on, get a little savings, and get free shipping. It's not such a bad thing.
Yeah, I think, yeah. That was a very convincing statement I just made to say we're looking to support the nation here. Just like we're saying thank you, we're also saying thank you. So listen, thank you.
Before we move on, I wanted to bring in that other question from Garrett Jansen that we promised the listeners we would pick up.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what else he's asking.
Yeah,
appreciate him writing in.
There's one that I really quite liked here, and it mentions Jess, and any time we get a chance to bring up Jess's name, I think is something we must do. So he says,
for sure,
Jess has said in an episode that she's struggled to get along with Ben Nevis. Have there been any distilleries either of you took your time to come around on? Any loves at first sip? Any loves that may have been soured? Oh, I like that.
Oh.
Yeah. So
obvious first go-to for me, and really the biggest turnaround. Which, before I get to that, I will say, Ben Nevis was on my list. Right?
Yeah, sure it was.
Ben Nevis wasn't really a go-to for me. I had some bad experiences, and then, boom, it landed really well. The big turnaround that comes to mind for me is Glen Scotia. In tasting Glen Scotia in the mid to late 90s, absolutely not a fan. Really turned off by it. And completely wrote it off while going about learning tons of other distilleries.
Yeah.
Then, and I think regular listeners know how we feel about the man, but I think the Ian McAllister era is...
Yeah.
I'm trying not to be too effusive, but I don't know if I can avoid it. I think he has overseen the most spectacular turnaround of any distillery that I can immediately bring to mind. I go searching for Glen Scotia. I don't quite collect Glen Scotia, but I certainly enjoy purchasing it.
Oh, yeah.
And when you and I are sourcing casks, Glen Scotia is something that always gets our attention. Like, okay, let's see what this one has to offer. So that for me is a whopping turnaround. What an achievement from Ian and the team and Loch Lomond, so on and so forth.
But there was definitely, I agree with you, there was a Darth Vader turns Anakin Skywalker moment with Ian McAllister coming on board, where there was a sea change there, right? There was a switch, and Ian McAllister coming on board, reworking some of that liquid already in wood and working on the liquid in production. it's just clear they're putting out some fantastic liquid. So I agree with you there.
Yeah, and again, right, it definitely came with a change in ownership. It came with a change in investment. It came with a change in policy. Like, you know, I was even looking over, I think, whiskey.com the other day. And they were saying, you know, at the time they had written their entry, like, wood is the current focus of the distillery. And you go spend time with Ian, and Ian talks about that, and you know his love of bourbon, right, in his Campbelltonian accent, right, and his absolute love for that. But then his discovery that not all bourbon is created equal, right, and you know what a Buffalo Trace cask will do, and what a Jim Beam cask will do, and him getting nerdy about bourbon on the back of you know their wood management policies. So love it. Yeah. Love it, love it, love it. So, and you Joshua, what's a big turnaround for you?
It's an easy one to answer because it wasn't an easy one to come around to. But once I did, it's so it's so glaring. So here's what I'll say. I have been a Bunnahabhain fan for a good number of years. I was really turned on to them years ago. When they switched the recipe over and they went from 40% non-chill filtered, they went from 40% chill filtered to 46.3%, you know, in their 12-year-old and their 18-year-old. And you'd said, pick up this Bunnahabhain 12 at 46.3. Yeah. It's going to rock your world. I picked up a bottle, boom, it rocked my world.
Agreed.
And so then I went on seeking out other Bunnahabhains, specifically non-peated. I loved that there was this Isla distillery that focused on non-peated. And then we started receiving samples and tasting, you know, sips here and there from other people's bottlings of Bunnahabhain's peated offerings, namely Stoisha. And each sample, each pour I had turned me off. And everyone just none of them fit with my palate. It was like trying to jam, you know, square pegs in a round hole. And now being part of the ASC family here and seeing what's available to us, we're saying, well, you know what? Either A, I'm going to come around to it, or B, maybe we'll find that odd cask that I finally say is good. And then we receive sample after sample after sample, and I'm starting to find that I'm loving each one more than the next. Like I finally came around to peated Bunnahabhain. It took me a good long while, but,
welcome.
But here we are.
Yeah, I guess my situation with them is slightly different from yours, in that I really, you know, like you say, yes, when they made the move with the Bunnahabhain 12. But again, in first encountering them in the mid to late 90s, they were kind of flat. Yeah. They were kind of flabby. They lacked the structure that I was really looking for. And it wasn't until 2012 that they really landed on my radar. At the same time, I didn't feel a need, and Jess and I have discussed this at length because she thinks I'm incorrect, but I didn't feel the need to add a lightly peated or low peated Isla to the arsenal. Yeah. Right. I liked my Ardbegs and my Lafroigs and my Kalilas, and then came on with Kilholman and obviously the love affair there. And so Bunnahabhain for me has just kind of percolated away on the back burner. And as you rightly say, exploring so many Stoisha casks has got me revved up and got me a little bit excited here. Yeah. Like, okay. And again, right, Jess is going to say, welcome to the club, right? We were waiting for you. And just some excellent offerings. And then seeing what it does in different types of wood as well has been really fascinating behind the scenes. So Yeah, that's a good answer. I like that one. I think we feel quite similarly about Glen Scotia and about Bunnahabhain on this one.
Agreed. And just to round out his question here, he said, are there any loves at first sip? And he did ask another question, which was any loves that may have soured. And I don't want to, I think the fact of the matter is, so many distilleries are making great liquid, and tastes change. And I'd rather not focus on a negative and potentially say a bad thing, because my palate is going to be different from your palate, is going to be different from Garrett's palate. So let's focus on the positive. What was a love at first sip for you?
Lafroig 10.
Oh, Lafroig 10 Cask Strength, right?
What was it? September, October 1996? Yeah, boom. That was that.
Wow.
Done.
Look at that.
The famous Finnish sauna from my Finnish friend Petty Pirainen. Right?
There you go.
Just boom. That came in like a ton of bricks. I still remember sitting at that table. I still remember the look on his face, Petty's face, since I couldn't see my own. But I know exactly how I felt in that moment. Yeah, boom. Gosh, 96. So, 86 or 87 distillate happening there. Gosh.
Amazing. Wow. Yeah, for me, it's Lagavulin 16. That's what turned me on.
I knew your answer. Yep.
Right. When you can have a whiskey that has you focus on good memories and not just flavor, that's doing more. That's you're entering a time machine in that case, and that's what I love.
Oh, without doubt.
So,
yeah. On that mention of flavor, for me it was I didn't think flavors like that could exist in a liquid.
Yep.
You get to drink this.
When my guy at my synagogue had said, and I said, what whiskey should I try? And he said, do you like sweet things, spicy things, or smoky things? I'm like, I didn't even know a smoky thing could exist in a drink. Like, yes, please, and thank you.
How far it's come.
Indeed.
Gosh, those initial moments of discovery are so exciting, and getting to be responsible for that with anybody at a single cask nation tasting just means the world.
When's the last time you had a moment like that? That aha moment.
This is going to sound a little bit like I'm trying to lead the listener, but I literally had it last week in a revisit, and so I know when the original moment was, but last week, right, doing tastings, I pour the backwoods, and that chocolate cherry note floors me every single time. It's so dry and so gripping, and yet so alluring, so delicious. And so I think back to the first time we tasted the Heritage Rye from Lee and Brie down there in Yakindanda, and I just think that was a moment where I thought, how is this happening?
Yeah.
How is this a thing in a bottle?
Yeah.
And that really gripped me. And so retasting our most recent backwoods took me back to that initial moment.
There you go. Yeah. I think mine, the most recent one, was tasting, and it was bottled by the distillery. It was the Westward Pinot Noir single cask. It was bottled for Execs Whiskey Club, and it was doing things that no other whiskey had. And now I've been exploring Westward, left, right, and center. And the fact that we bottled one that just blew my mind, and we've got another one in the warehouse that may see the light of day come next year. Really excited about that. Yeah, it's just it's those rare moments where a flavor comes out of left field and just stops you in your tracks, right?
To go back to Rebecca's opening email from today's episode, I would also say, and I know we've said it on this podcast, I know it's not to everyone's taste, but Westland 5 malt. That captures my attention every time I taste it. I'm just like, oh yeah. You know when you get comfy and you start taking a relationship for granted, and then you go, oh yeah, you are really special. That to me is Westland 5 malt. Yeah. And that turns my head every time. And I remember, oh yes. And I told this story the other week in Austin as well, about you and I going out to Westland Distillery for the very first time. And that was off the back of Steve sending us the journalist press pack and us tasting it and saying, we have to get in bed with this distillery immediately. Immediately.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, on the back of a press pack.
Yeah.
And so to have that type of relationship and to continue revisiting that relationship is incredibly special.
Yeah. You know, here they were as pioneers in what is now a growing category, but, 10 years ago, as small as could be. And here we said, oh, we're a small fledgling company with very little money. Why don't we hop on that? And I'm glad we did. It's a relationship that we both still hold dear, and it's great to have been part of that wave, part of that growing American single malt whiskey wave. And now with Balcones here, it was great listening back and hearing about their evolution, from years ago and the various spirits that they produced. I remember, first being put onto them through their Baby Blues, sort of a corn whiskey. And then they did a rumble cask, which I think was like a honey liqueur. Not honey liqueur, but a honey liquor, distilled honey liquor. And then tasting some of their rye, and then tasting some of their single malts and their brimstone. And now here they are as they go on, and they're starting to focus more and more and more on single malt, which I really love. And you had asked them a very cool question. It was basically, what do you see for the future of American single malt? So, listen, why don't we end this episode with their answer to your question?
Absolutely, yeah. And since we're not coming back in, let's get out of here saying thanks to Rebecca, thanks to Garrett, thanks to Gabe and Emma and Alex, thanks to you, Joshua, for helming the ship. Thanks to the Feldners.
Thank you.
For these beautiful bottles. And thanks to every single listener out there. Listen, if you want to take up the challenge, drop us an email, info@singlecastnation.com. We would, of course, love to hear from you and include you in a future episode of the Podcast. And until then, Joshua, here's to you. Here's to us. And here's over to me, hiya, with Gabe and Emma. Cheers.
Cheers.
So we're back with Gabe and Emma in the blending room at Balcones here. Blending room, blending lab, surely.
Blending room.
I always say room.
Okay.
People always call it a lab, and that feels way less artsy to me.
Yeah. We don't want it feeling too sterile. Too. We also wanted to make it clear that there's different rules for labs than for rooms.
Of course.
So, this is a room.
Of course.
This is a room. No lab coats.
So here we are celebrating the blending room at Balcones. And Balcones was a founding member of the ASMWC, the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. And I believe Jared was instrumental in the beginning of that conversation as well. I know you're in blending, but I also know you're very passionate about this category. And I'm curious for each of you, where do you see American Single Malt going in America? What do you think needs to be done for single malt and American single malt going forward? If you had your druthers, what would you maybe love to see? But I'm curious, as people who live and breathe this day in and day out, you're talking about increasing the quantity of single malt that you're distilling here. What do you see? What do you think? Where are we going with this category? Soon to be category. Let's put some pressure on the TTB.
These kinds of questions are always difficult for me to answer simply because the way my brain works, I leave it so open. Like, I hope what happens is better than I ever could imagine for it, and that I can't imagine it now because it's going to be however long in the future something amazing is going to kick off. But
sure.
I mean, as along with everyone else, I really wish to see it become a legal category. I want American single malt to slip into conversation so easily and slip off the tongue so naturally. To the average whiskey consumer, I hope that American single malt is not something that they have to ask, what is that? Mm-hmm. And as far as from a producer perspective, I see a lot of innovation, experimentation happening. I see craft producers going out of their way to experiment in this category and see what's possible. And I just hope that over time does not diminish. Like that, you know, it is such a new category comparatively. And so I hope that focus is lasting and that, you know, we get hundreds of years of dedication to American single malt instead of like, we're going to focus on this for 50 years and then like something else kind of comes along. And I hope that there's always a very strong presence of American single malt that keeps like pushing through and pulsating in the industry. And it's very intentional and just authentic.
That's wonderful.
But I feel very confident that that's going to happen. I feel good about it.
And Gabe?
Yeah, sure. I think Emma put it pretty well. Like, just our hopes for the hopefully imminent future, you know, of the legalization and standardization of it and recognition. You know, and there's been a lot. You know, there's been rumors, you know, from retailers and accounts and bars over the years, like, oh, well, as soon as it's da-da-da-da, then we'll da-da-da-da-da. And I don't really even put all that much stock in those. I think there's some retailers, they might have an American single malt section, but I don't think it's going to be some overnight wave. I think it's going to help, and I think it's very important, and we want it to happen. But I think that an exercise that we did many years ago, before the November 2022 acquisition by Diageo, was we were kind of planning the strategy on the sales side and marketing side, and I wasn't a big part of it. I was kind of like a fly on the wall. But I remember some of the stakeholders in that conversation going like, well, you know, with this American single malt category, we kind of need to see where it's going to go before we do more. And then we had the Nielsen data in front of us, and we crunched the numbers, and, you know, I think Jared and Alex and I were able to respond and go, no, like, if you look at the numbers though, we're 40% of that mix. So like waiting to see where the category is going is waiting to see what we're going to do. So we have to decide that we're doing this, and we have to decide that we are going to commit to this, and we're going to commit our time, energy, and resources and our money to educate folks and to really, I mean, it's up to us, you know, this idea that everyone can kind of just wait until the tide is high enough and then slip their boat in the water is like, no. I think, that's a tall order though. It's hard to do. It's hard to educate folks. It's been exciting to see some of the majors get involved at the very least to kind of, to show like, hey, use their reach, and their marketing divisions and their sales force to kind of like shine a spotlight on the new category. We're not threatened by that. We think, you know, the more the merrier. But yeah, I think it's going to take, even after the standardization, it's still going to take work. And I'm honestly hoping it's sooner rather than later, so that we can all see, hey, that wasn't the magic bullet that fixed everything.
Yeah.
This is still you still got to put your nose to the grindstone, and you have to bring people into your story. Don't wait for the TTB to do it for you. But all that to say, can't wait. Very excited. We have lots of plans. We have banners and sparklers, and kazoos, just waiting for the day. But it's not. I don't think it's a silver bullet. But we're very excited.
So the way you're talking right now, then it sounds like it's the next step along a significant journey, and that journey of decades and centuries that Emma's hoping for into the future.
Exactly.
That's wonderful. I think that's a really articulate take from each of you. And I think it's very level-headed as well, which I would expect nothing less from the two of you. So thank you to Emma, Gabe, Alex for having me on site today. Brilliant. So happy to finally be here. See you all in your natural habitat. And it's been a blast. Thanks ever so much.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming all this way. My goodness. Yeah.
Easy peasy.
Thank you so much for having us.
Cheers, friends.